Two things I've noticed from Mercedes. One is the very downbeat. Oh, Red Bull are faster, Ferrari are faster. Oh, we're going to have to change the rules to get us off the line. There's lots of politics and spin going on with what everyone within that team is saying. But in terms of the car, which is probably where my expertise lies rather than the politics, is they've made some changes to the car. It's what you would expect in a second test. It's nothing radical. They've changed the shape of the side pods ever so slightly. You'd need to compare the two cars next to each other to really see it. So it's not a big change in philosophy like we saw with Audi, for example. They've changed some of the floor details, the diffuser, the slots ahead of the rear tyres, just all that kind of incremental work that you would expect. And I would imagine some of these parts could well change even as we arrive in Melbourne as well. So again, it's not stuff that is radically different. It's just refining their concept. And again, when you look at how they've performed over their shakedown, the Barcelona shakedown, the first Bahrain test, it's all looking very good. And everyone that's not in Mercedes is lining them up to be potential champions.
Well, let me ask you this. If Mercedes are going to end up winning the championship, where are they going to be beating McLaren? Because presumably any power unit advantage is going to be the same for both, right?
Yes, well, the power unit advantage, it comes in two different ways. First of all, you have the fundamentals of the package, how they've laid out the power unit and how they're working with the hybrid and the energy recovery systems. That's all kind of locked into the Mercedes power unit that both Mercedes and McLaren and their other customers will benefit from. But then you've actually got how they then deploy those strategies. How are they recovering energy around the lap? How are they using it differently at different points at the weekend during free practice into qualifying? Attacking in the race, defending in the race, getting off the line. If indeed, if you believe some of these people, these cars are almost impossible to get off the line quickly. I think that the live test we saw today proved otherwise. So I think where they will benefit from is in their energy recovery strategies used through the weekend. I think that's where Mercedes have got the benefit. Now, I was then going to mention Formula E because Mercedes developed their own Formula E powertrain, and it was very effective. It won them championships. And a lot of the strategies that they are using in Formula E to recover energy, when to save energy, when to deploy it, that's all stuff that you learn in Formula E very quickly. And Formula One is kind of moving into that area where energy recovery and energy management is going to be probably the one thing that separates all of these cars through the year. So I think Mercedes have an advantage. Now, McLaren, most people will actually know, also had a Formula E team, which was very much born on the back of the Mercedes team. So I think they've maybe got slightly less learnings there. But I think the trump card that McLaren bring to this still will be tyre management. So everyone that I've spoken to, what are the things that are really going to make the difference this year? It's not necessarily going to be aerodynamics and blown flaps behind the exhaust. It's going to be tyre management in the race and going in for qualifying, and energy management, particularly again through qualifying and in the race. So it's quite evenly balanced between the two teams this year. And it's going to be a very long season. People are going to be learning and improving all the time. What we see in the first handful of races in terms of the competitive order could change three or four times through the year. So yeah, it's something we just have to keep watching as the season goes on.
When you look at the McLaren, and we know how good the car was last year with time management and indeed with a lot of other things, just general aero efficiency, how much of last year's aero ethos, do you see in this year's car?
I mean, I think I see a lot of what we saw last year in the car, particularly with the suspension. So this will be their second, even in some respects, third year going on with this suspension concept that they have where they don't run a front lower wishbone, they run independent links and some very interesting steering geometries. So I think McLaren should still hold some advantage, at least in the first part of the season in tyre management. The car looks every bit as good in terms of the aero setup than the Mercedes. I'd maybe say perhaps McLaren is slightly more interesting for me to look at in terms of some of the concepts, but again, I don't think that's going to make a huge difference between the two cars. So I think McLaren will take the advantage there. And I mean, from what we've seen so far, the Mercedes drivers seem quite happy with this switch to the front multi-link setup, which is one of the key things that McLaren have had in terms of getting the tyres to work in the way they want, at all across all tracks, all temperatures. And we know that McLaren had some troubles with it, particularly last year, where initially Lando didn't like the steering feel, and then they changed it, and then it seems that Oscar didn't like the steering feel. In theory, they should have got that working for both drivers this year, but then it means will Mercedes and indeed all the other teams that have followed them with this front lower multi-link setup, are they going to struggle with the drivers just not getting that feeling through the steering wheel that they need so much to to get these cars to perform? And these cars are looking quite tricky to drive. So if you haven't got confidence in the steering feel, then it can really eat away the time around the lap.